We begin in Egypt, where prominent liberal leader Mohamed El Baradei was sworn in as the country's interim vice president for foreign relations. The swearing-in was presided over by interim President Adli Mansour on Sunday as Egypt's new leadership pushes ahead with the transition. The appointment of El Baradei, a former head of the UN nuclear watchdog and a Nobel Peace Laureate, follows the military overthrow of President Mohamed Morsi on July 3rd. El Baradei was initially tipped to lead the cabinet, but his nomination was rejected by the ultra-conservative Salafist party Al-Nur. He was late last year named head of the National Salvation Front, a coalition of leftist and liberal groups formed after Mr. Morsi granted himself sweeping powers in a constitutional declaration.
All of us think that Egypt's fate is in danger, and we will do all we can with goodwill to build the trust amongst the factions of the Egyptian people.
And staying in Egypt, where interim prime minister is contacting candidates for cabinet ministries with a view to having the cabinet sworn in by the end of the week. Hazem El Beblawi, a liberal economist and former finance minister, is trying to form a coalition government that will oversee a roadmap put forth by the interim president after the ouster of Mohamed Morsi. Asser Hakim looks at the delicate process to choose the new cabinet.
Hazem El Beblawi's mission to form a new government is not an easy task. Since the 2011 revolution, his three predecessors took weeks each to form their governments.
Numerous parties and political forces emerged recently. They are diverse from extreme liberals to extreme Islamists, and each wants to be represented in the cabinet. This puts huge pressure on the prime minister. It is impossible to make them all happy.
There are four forces on the ground now: the liberals, the revolutionary youth, Islamists and the Mubarak remnants. Beblawi knows he cannot satisfy them all, so he decided not to choose any of them in his cabinet.
The Prime Minister said his cabinet will be formed from technocrats, not politicians. He even resigned from his party. It was welcomed by all forces. The problem now is that cabinet will be required to tackle the economic crisis within an unstable environment related to a new constitution and upcoming elections.
That is why several candidates turned down offers for cabinet posts this week, making the selection process even slower. It's a tough balancing act for Beblawi, but time is not on his side. Observers say the cabinet has to start work immediately as economic problems worsen every day. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Now, previously a leading opposition figure, Mohamed El Baradei was appointed Tuesday by Egypt's caretaker president Adli Mansour as vice president for foreign affairs in the transitional government, ending days of speculation about the selection for the post. El Baradei, who's 71 years old, obtained a degree in law from Cairo University in 1962 and holds a doctorate in international law from New York University's law school. He began his diplomatic career in Egypt's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1964 and has worked in Egypt's permanent mission to the United Nations. He served as Director General of the IAEA from 1997 to 2009. His tenure was marked by high-profile issues such as inspections in Iraq preceding the 2003 U.S. invasion and tensions over Iran's controversial nuclear program. He and the IAEA were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Socially, he is married and a father of two. All right, so let's discuss this issue further. We do have CCTV's Yasser Hakim joining us live from Cairo. So El Baradei has been sworn in as VP. Yasser, how are Egyptians reacting to this news?
Most of the Egyptians welcome the news because Baradei is looked upon as the first who actually stood in front of the former president Hosni Mubarak before the 2011 revolution, and he was the first to ask for him to step down and to be ousted as president. And a lot of the revolutionary forces, the revolutionary youth and the opposition parties and most of the parties look at him as their godfather in politics, and especially in overthrowing the former president. The only group that really has some worries about him are the Islamists. They seem as too liberal for them. and they were against him being nominated as prime minister, but as vice president, they say they don't mind because the vice president does not have much powers as the prime minister. So mainly or generally, the news has been welcomed by most Egyptians.
So his swearing in, of course, is seen by many as the initial steps towards forming a new government. What's the latest information in regards to the formation of the new cabinet?
So far, the discussions are on the way, are ongoing between the prime minister, interim prime minister, and the candidates. He said that the government will include 30 ministers and 2 deputies. So far, there are a lot of speculations, but the officially confirmed names, there are around 6 or 7 actually new ministers have been confirmed, and about 6 from the previous government will continue. So we've got around 15 names so far, or 14 names so far, and the rest of the 30 are still under discussion. There are a number who have refused to continue. There are a few who are saying that they need time to think. The challenges are tough, so it's not easy to get a cabinet so quickly. Biblawi said that his deadline is on Wednesday, and he's on track to try to reach that deadline with a full cabinet announced on that day.
So yes, a few individuals, like you've mentioned, have declined the offer to be in this new cabinet. Yet Mansour is talking about having an all-inclusive government. Is that realistic?
Not really. You have a problem with the number of factions and political forces on the ground in Egypt, and you can't satisfy them all. Especially the Islamists right now. The Muslim Brotherhood has refused to take part in this new government, although he named some of the members of the Muslim Brotherhood to be nominees, but they have refused, so that puts this apart. Most of the ones who have been chosen so far are technocrats, non-politicians, but actually they are part of the liberal camp, and they will be the higher and the more number of forces will be actually from the liberal force. The Islamists will be a minority in this camp, but at this point it's not widely or it is widely accepted actually, because the Islamists had 1 year, the Muslim Brotherhood and its allies had 1 year before, and it proved non-successful, and that's why there has been an uprising in the last week. So they're giving a chance to the other side, the liberals, to give more chance in the new government. So it will not be so inclusive, but it will not be political, it will be technocrat government.
All right, Yasser, thanks very much for joining us. Yasser Hakim live there in Cairo. Let's head down south now to Zimbabwe. Day 1 of voting there, and the special vote for uniformed forces, which has ended with scores of prospective voters yet to cast their ballot. The special vote allows the army, police and other civil servants who will be working on election day to vote 2 weeks before the rest of the nation. Farai Makutuya has more.
Voting got underway this morning at a slow pace, a trend that was to be maintained throughout the day. The Electoral Commission was inundated with over 80,000 applications for consideration for the special vote. Not all of these will be successful. The criteria they use is to establish that the person who has applied for the vote will indeed be deployed and on duty on the day of the elections, thereby making them unable to cast their ballot. The vetting and approving has caused the delays as names of approved voters have been reaching the polling stations intermittently. This has left many uniformed servicemen and women frustrated. However, they have another day to cast their ballots on Monday. Meanwhile, presidential aspirants are blazing the campaign trail. President Mugabe cut an unfamiliar figure, donning the garb of a local religious sect. However, his message was characteristic of the veteran revolutionary.
We made a mistake in 2008 by voting for a party that wants to promote whites and foreigners, a party that thinks nothing can prosper when it's done by locals. Changirai says that if he comes to power, he will give back the farms to the whites.
His main rival, Morgan Changirai, has been busy selling his party's manifesto.
We only not show our way and showcase that we are a party of excellence, but that we are a part of substance as demonstrated by our policies.
Those policies promise jobs and better lives for Zimbabweans. Mugabe's ZANU-PF has hinged its campaign on indigenization and empowerment. It remains to be seen who will win over the electorate come July 31st. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a break. Coming up. Homebound, UNHCR strategy to repatriate thousands of Somali refugees in Kenya.
To be honest, there's no real update. Yes, he's getting a little bit better, but I cannot say he's out of critical. He's still in the critical phase, but he's reacting much more in the past 2 days.
And Mandela's grandson speaks on the icon's health condition. Welcome back. The M23 rebel movement is accusing the Kinshasa government of frustrating peace talks with delaying tactics. Head of the M23 delegation in Kampala, Renea Bandi, says the senior government team has gone back to Kinshasa, leaving them with a group that cannot make decisions. CCTV's Isabel Nigeria has the details.
Since the resumption of talks in early July, the M23 claimed to have met the Kinshasa delegation only once. Head of the delegation, Renea Bandi, says top officials returned to Kinshasa to take care of other responsibilities, leaving behind a group that is of little help.
First, the head is the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kinshasa, who says he has a lot of he's very busy in these days, so he's not there. And his deputy is Malu Malu, has been appointed as the head of the Electoral Commission, the National Electoral Commission. So he can't do the same, both at the same time.
Abandi says this lull is frustrating their efforts in seeking a peaceful solution to the DRC conflict. Both groups have been meeting the facilitator separately, but the M23 movement believes face-to-face meetings are far more useful.
They are mixing methods. On one hand, they want a political solution. On another hand, they want a militarist solution. That's why even they've been going more far and more deeply with a militarist solution. And they are enforcing forces.
Uganda's army spokesman Paddy Ankunda, however, says talks have been taking place.
The two delegations have submitted their paper, their agreements, their proposed papers to the chief mediator, and the chief mediator has in return given to the two delegations his guidance paper.
The M23 concerns follow warnings from the Congo government to all rebel groups, including the M23, to lay down weapons or face retaliation. Abandi says Kinshasa seems uninterested in settling the conflict peacefully and warns that war will not solve Congo's problems. The M23 rebel delegation returned to Kampala after UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged the group to settle their conflicts on table. The Uganda Army spokesperson says the facilitator will make a formal communication on the progress of the talks within a week. Now, whether the two parties would have resolved their grievances by then, uncertainty still looms back home in eastern Congo. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
Meanwhile, the newly appointed force commander of the United Nations mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Carlos Alberto dos Santos Cruz from Brazil, visited the site of a recent flare-up between the M23 rebels and other armed groups on Friday. General dos Santos Cruz was at Carachuzinha, some 8 kilometers north of Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, where MONUSCO erected a barrier to prevent any advances by M23 rebels to attack Goma. UN peacekeepers opened fire on an unidentified group of armed men and members of the M23 rebel group on Saturday. At least 4 of the attackers were shot. Around 30 armed men attacked M23 positions near the village. The M23 rebel group is made up of former members of the Congolese armed forces who mutinied in April 2012.
We don't have priorities. Any group doing crimes against the population, we are going to take action against them.
The Global Refugee Agency, UNHCR, has proposed the formation of a body that will handle the repatriation of Somali refugees from Kenya. More than 500,000 refugees are expected to go back home with a concerted effort by groups from Somalia and Kenya. However, UNHCR argues the process should not be premature as the returnees may contribute to the destabilization of Somalia. CCTV's Groom Chala has more details.
600,000 is the number of Somali refugees residing in Kenyan camps. There are also some 240,000 Somalis in the Ethiopian refugee camps at the moment. These persons in exile can now plan their lives ahead in their own land, as the Global Refugee Agency has proposed the formation of a body that will handle the repatriation of Somali refugees from Kenya and other neighboring states.
In the longer term, we are discussing with the governments that are hosting Somali refugees, Kenya, Ethiopia, and the government of Somalia, to prepare for that eventual repatriation of the refugees to the country when the conditions are conducive.
The United Nations High Commission for Refugee, UNHCR boss Antonio Guterres wants the refugees most based at Dadaab camp be returned home in phases managed by a special commission. And the job will be handled by a group from Somalia and Kenya. But UNHCR wants to make sure the refugees are not going back to their nation just for the sake of returning home only.
What we do not want is people to go back home just to be on the move again, either returning to where they were or moving to another country. We need to avoid at all costs that now people move from Kenya to Somalia to then move from Somalia to Ethiopia or vice versa, or to become a factor of destabilization. That's why it's so important to do well the preparation of voluntary repatriation.
The Kenyan government has been demanding that the neighboring Somali refugees return home following the achievement of relative peace by AU forces in the Eastern Africa country. Still, the UN Agency for Refugees is convinced that the repatriation process should not be undercooked.
We are working with the international community, with the government of Somalia, to try to prepare the grounds for the refugees to go back, so that when they return, they do not find that there is a need for them to return into Ethiopia or to Kenya, where they have just been, because the services or livelihoods in their country is not there.
Because of frequent conflicts, migration in Eastern Africa region is still a big concern. Paradoxically, however, lack of adequate money to run the many refugee camps in the region, life may not be the same for the newly exiled people again.
Currently, Somalia is relatively peaceful, and its citizens who left the country because of the then bloody conflict and in fear of Al-Shabaab are now returning home on their own. But all stakeholders fear that if Somalia's government cannot be supported in the right manner to help it play its role, then stopping refugees from that land is far from reality. Gruntala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To South Africa now, where Nelson Mandela's grandson on Friday said he was encouraged by the way his grandfather responds when spoken to in hospital, but the former South African president has been receiving treatment for 5 weeks. In an interview with Eyewitness News on Friday, Ndaba Mandela said Nelson Mandela's condition had not improved nor worsened, but that he was responsive.
To be honest, there's no real update. Yes, he's getting a little bit better, but I cannot say he's out of critical. He's still in the critical phase, but he's reacting much more in the past 2 days.